People often talk about toxic people as if they were monsters intentionally designed to hurt others. But the truth behind the behavior is far more complex and deeply rooted in patterns most people never notice. Toxic behavior rarely begins as an act of malice. It usually starts from unresolved emotional wounds, psychological defense mechanisms, and survival strategies learned long before they even realized they were using them. When you observe someone who constantly blames others, manipulates conversations, or plays the victim, you're not just seeing a personality trait, seeing the result of years of internal conflict they never learned how to process. And even though their actions can destroy relationships, drain your emotional energy, and leave you second-guessing yourself, understanding the hidden psychology behind their behavior reveals something surprising. Most toxic people do not fully understand why they behave the way they do. Many toxic individuals grow up in environments where vulnerability is not safe. If a child learns early that showing emotion leads to punishment, embarrassment, or abandonment, they build emotional armor as a form of protection later in life. That armor becomes their default behavior. Instead of expressing sadness, they become defensive. Instead of apologizing when they're wrong, they shut down or flip the blame. Instead of forming healthy connections, they create emotional distance through criticism or manipulation. What we call toxic traits are often survival mechanisms that continued long after the original danger disappeared, and because they never learned emotional regulation, they rely on the same dysfunctional strategies that once kept them safe. The most common trait toxic people share is an inability to tolerate discomfort within themselves. They cannot handle the idea of being wrong, being criticized, or being exposed. So they project their insecurities onto others. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism where a person attributes their unwanted feelings to someone else. For example, if they feel jealous, they accuse you of being jealous. If they feel guilty, they accuse you of mistreating them. They transfer the emotional burden away from themselves because dealing with it internally is too overwhelming. This can create confusing interactions where you start questioning your own behavior, even when you did nothing wrong. Gaslighting. Another toxic behavior often comes from a similar place. Many people think gaslighting is always intentional psychological manipulation, but more often it stems from deep insecurity and fear of accountability. When someone feels threatened by the possibility of being exposed or confronted, their brain automatically shifts into self-preservation mode. They rewrite events, deny statements they made minutes earlier, or minimize the emotional impact of their actions. To them, reality becomes something flexible, something they can reshape to protect and even though their behavior is deeply damaging, in their mind they are simply trying to survive a perceived emotional threat. Toxic people often struggle with emotional maturity. Emotional maturity requires introspection, accountability, and the ability to regulate one's own reactions. But toxic individuals rarely developed these skills. Instead, they learn to cope through avoidance, blame, or control. When faced with conflict, they may escalate the situation because confrontation feels like danger. If someone tries to talk about an issue calmly, they might interpret it as an attack. Their nervous system becomes activated, and instead of responding with logic, they react from instinct. This is why small disagreements can quickly turn into arguments where the toxic person lashes out, withdraws, or turns everything around on you. Another hidden aspect of toxic behavior is emotional dependency. Even though they may appear confident, controlling, or even arrogant, many toxic individuals rely heavily on other people to validate their identity. Their self-esteem is fragile. They fear abandonment, but behave in ways that push people away. This cycle creates emotional chaos in their relationships. They may alternate between idealizing you and devaluing you, not because they enjoy hurting you, but because their internal world is unstable. When they feel secure, they're charming. When they feel insecure, they become defensive or hostile. This inconsistency confuses the people around them, making relationships feel unpredictable and emotionally exhausting. One of the most misunderstood traits is their tendency to play the victim. While it can appear manipulative, in many cases, toxic individuals genuinely see themselves as victims. They interpret neutral situations as personal attacks. They believe people are against them, even when no one has done anything harmful. This mindset comes from cognitive distortions patterns of thinking that twist reality. The world becomes divided into people who support me and people who hurt me. There is no middle ground, and because they feel constantly threatened, they believe their behavior is justified. In their mind, they are defending themselves, even when they are the ones causing harm. Toxic people also have difficulty understanding boundaries because they grew up in environments where their own boundaries were ignored or violated. They struggle to recognize that others have boundaries as well. They may demand more time, energy, or attention than others can give. When someone tries to establish limits, they interpret it as rejection or betrayal. This emotional sensitivity triggers controlling behavior as a way to prevent the perceived loss. They are not trying to dominate people because they enjoy power. They are trying to prevent abandonment. Unfortunately, this attempt to protect themselves ends up suffocating others. Another critical element is emotional contagion. Toxic individuals carry intense, unregulated emotions. Anger, fear, jealousy, and insecurity radiate from them. And because humans are highly responsive to emotional signals, being around them can make you feel anxious, guilty, or drained even if they don't say anything. This is why interacting with them often feels heavy. Their inner turmoil spills into the environment, creating tension and discomfort. Healthy people try to calm the situation, but this often reinforces the toxic person's behavior because they learn they can gain control through emotional intensity. Their need for control is not always about dominance. Sometimes it is about predictability. Unpredictability in childhood can lead to hypervigilance, the constant scanning of the environment for potential threats. As adults, toxic people try to control their surroundings to prevent emotional discomfort. They may monitor where you go, question your decisions, or demand explanations for minor things. This behavior can feel suffocating, but from their perspective, it creates a sense of safety. The problem is that their fear-based need for control makes others feel powerless and trapped, leading to conflict and emotional exhaustion. Finally, toxic people often lack self. They may believe they are honest when they are actually hurtful. They may believe they are strong when they are rigid. They may believe they are caring when they are controlling. Without self-awareness, they cannot change because they cannot recognize the patterns that govern their behavior. And whenever someone tries to point it out, they perceive it as an attack instead of an opportunity for growth. When you look closely at the relationships toxic people build, a repeating pattern becomes visible cycles of closeness followed by withdrawal, affection followed by hostility, promises followed by disappointment. These cycles are not random. They come from emotional instability and an inner fear that people will leave once they see the real version of them. To prevent the pain of rejection, they unconsciously test the people around them. They push boundaries, create unnecessary conflicts, and observe how others react. If you stay, they feel reassured temporarily, but the fear returns and the cycle repeats. This instability forms the emotional roller coaster that defines many toxic relationships, where moments of calm are quickly overshadowed by tension, insecurity, or conflict. Another important element to understand is that toxic behavior often comes from unmet emotional needs. Everyone needs acceptance, love, respect, and validation. But toxic individuals seek these needs in extreme ways. Instead of asking for reassurance, they create situations where people must prove their loyalty. Instead of expressing vulnerability, they use guilt or manipulation to keep others close. They fear that being honest about their emotions will make them appear weak, so they compensate by becoming overly demanding or overly critical. This creates a dynamic where their needs are never fully satisfied, and the people around them become exhausted, trying to meet expectations that keep shifting. Many toxic people also struggle with emotional blindness. They have difficulty recognizing how their tone, words, and actions affect others. When they say something hurtful, they may not understand why someone reacts with sadness or anger. In their perspective, their emotions feel justified, so they believe their reactions are reasonable. Emotional blindness prevents them from seeing the consequences of their behavior, and without feedback, they are willing to accept. They continue repeating the same patterns. This lack of emotional feedback is why toxic individuals often believe they are the victims of situations they actually created. It's also important to consider how shame shapes their behavior. Shame is one of the most powerful and destructive emotions in psychology. Unlike guilt, which says, "I did something wrong," shame says, "I am wrong." People who carry deep shame often develop toxic coping strategies. They hide their flaws, avoid vulnerability, and project their insecurities onto others. They might criticize people harshly because they are terrified of being criticized themselves. They might act superior because they feel inferior internally. They may lie, exaggerate, or blame others because accepting responsibility would confirm their worst fear that they are not good enough. Toxic behavior becomes a shield that protects them from confronting the parts of themselves they cannot accept. Toxic individuals often operate from scarcity, the belief that love, attention, respect, or success are limited resources. This makes them competitive in relationships, threatened by others' achievements, and resentful when someone receives praise. Their fear of scarcity can lead to possessiveness, jealousy, and a desperate need to be the center of someone's emotional world. They interpret others' independence as abandonment and their happiness as a threat. This creates an emotional environment where people feel pressured to dim their own light to avoid triggering the toxic person's insecurities. Another hidden layer is cognitive dissonance. Toxic individuals frequently behave in ways that contradict their values. But because acknowledging this contradiction creates psychological discomfort, they rewrite their own narrative. If they hurt someone, they tell themselves the other person deserved it. If they break a promise, they justify it with excuses. If a relationship falls apart, they rewrite the story so they appear innocent. This constant reshaping of reality protects their fragile self-image but damages every relationship they touch, because accountability becomes impossible when the truth is altered to fit their emotional comfort. Toxic people also experience relational paranoia, exaggerated sensitivity to rejection or betrayal. Even small things, such as someone taking too long to reply to a message or spending time with someone else, can trigger anxiety. This anxiety often becomes anger, accusations, or controlling behavior. Their fear of losing control turns into attempts to control others. They believe they are protecting themselves from future harm, but their behavior creates the very outcome they fear, people distancing themselves. One of the most painful aspects of dealing with a toxic person is the way they invalidate emotions. When someone opens up to them, they may dismiss, minimize, or mock the person's feelings. This happens because validating someone else's emotions requires empathy, and empathy requires emotional safety. Toxic individuals never learned how to sit with difficult feelings, neither their own nor anyone else's. Emotional vulnerability makes them uncomfortable, so they respond by shutting it down. They might change the subject, make the conversation about themselves, or act as though the other person is overreacting. Over time, this emotional invalidation can deeply harm relationships and make the people around them feel unseen and unheard. Toxic individuals often struggle with chronic dissatisfaction. No matter how much love, support, or attention they receive, it never feels like enough. This emptiness comes from internal wounds that external validation cannot heal. They may constantly seek reassurance, praise, or favors, but even when someone gives them everything, the void remains. This dissatisfaction drives extreme behavior drama, manipulation, emotional outbursts because they are unknowingly searching for something deeper than what others can provide. Their unresolved emotional pain creates a hunger that no relationship can satisfy. At the core of toxic behavior lies a fear of authenticity. Being authentic requires vulnerability, openness, and emotional honesty, all things that toxic individuals have been conditioned to avoid. They fear that if people saw their true selves, they would be rejected or abandoned. So they build emotional masks: false confidence, arrogance, victimhood, superiority, or emotional detachment. These masks protect them, but they also prevent them from forming real connections. The tragedy is that beneath the toxic behavior is often someone who desperately wants to be understood but is terrified of being exposed. Despite all this, it is important to remember that toxic individuals are not beyond change. However, change can only happen when they develop self-awareness and take responsibility for their actions. Most toxic people resist this process because it requires confronting painful truths about themselves. But those who genuinely seek growth can learn emotional regulation, empathy, and accountability. Healing their wounds can transform their relationships and help them build healthier patterns. Yet the person in a relationship with them must understand that they cannot force this change. Toxic individuals must choose to heal on their own. Understanding the hidden psychology behind toxic behavior does not mean excusing it. It means recognizing that toxicity is a form of emotional dysfunction, not an inherent identity. You can have compassion for someone while still protecting your peace. You can understand their pain without sacrificing your well-being. Awareness helps you break free from guilt, confusion, and self-blame. It allows you to set boundaries, recognize manipulation, and distance yourself when necessary. The more you understand the psychology behind toxic people, the less power their behavior has over you. And when you learn to recognize these patterns, you can protect your mental health, preserve your energy, and choose relationships that foster growth instead of chaos. No matter how deeply someone's toxic behavior affects you, you must remember that your worth is not defined by how others treat you. You deserve relationships that feel safe, stable, and supported. You deserve peace, not emotional exhaustion. Understanding the hidden psychology of toxic people is the first step toward creating that peace. If this deeper look into toxic behavior helped you understand someone in your life or even yourself, don't forget to subscribe to MindDecode. New insights about psychology, human behavior, and the hidden patterns of the mind are coming every day. Stay curious, stay aware, and take care of your mental space.